So the standard Western diet recommends the majority of what we're eating to be carbohydrates. Carbohydrates from bread, pasta, rice, legumes, fruit juices. Then after they recommend fruits and vegetables. I have nothing against fruits, but fruits are also a source of carbohydrates. So you see that there's this tremendous amount of carbohydrates that is being ingested and recommended for this kind of diet. Carbohydrate is a source of energy, but fat also is a source of energy. But when you're consuming the majority day after day of carbohydrates, your body will always take the carbohydrates first. It won't be using fat as a stored source of energy. It won't be taking from the bank there, because it will always use if there's a presence of glucose available. So the trick with glucose that's a bit tricky is that when you're ingesting these carbs, which basically are broken down into glucose molecules, if you're taking more than your body requires, the energy, the cell really does not need any more energy, it can be stored in the liver, about 120 grams of glucose. As well, there's a reservoir to store this glucose in your muscles too. People with larger muscles can possibly have a larger storage house for glucose. But if you're consuming the glucose and you don't need this energy at the moment, and your reservoir storage is maxed out, then the carbs that you're consuming will go as fat. So you'll become fat. It will make fat. The ketogenic diet is completely different because it's severely restricting the carbohydrates to about 20 to 30 grams, which is really not a lot. We do that by avoiding the sugar, all simple sugars, all junk food. We avoid the bread. We avoid the legumes, the rice, the pasta. So by severely restricting the glucose, your body has no choice, because it doesn't have glucose as a source of energy. It has no choice but to start looking at the fat. And the fat, which is a stored source of energy that should be used at one point in our life, it can only be accessed when there's no glucose. So that's the magic about the ketogenic diet, is that it allows us to become fat burners, to use fat as the main fuel. The fatty acids that are become available from our fat storage can be used as energy and also turn into ketones, and ketones can be used as energy. All of our body can be fueled very efficiently, and in my opinion, even better than with glucose. There's a few mechanisms in our body, in our brain, for example, that do require glucose. But fat has essential fatty acids because we need to ingest certain fats that we can't produce in our body. Amino acids also from protein. There's no essential carbohydrate, because with protein and fat you can produce the glucose needed. So you don't have to really consume through your diet glucose. You just have to get the protein and the fat, and the body will make the little amount of glucose that it requires for some specific pathways. The great thing about the ketogenic diet is that it creates a very low insulin environment. Glucose, even the complex carbs, have a drastic increase in insulin levels when you ingest these carbohydrates, compared to protein, which does have a insulin response, but much less than the glucose, as well as fat that almost has no influence on insulin, meaning if you're ingesting a lot of fat, you're not really spiking the insulin. Insulin is the fat storage hormone. Everything about obesity, insulin resistance, as well as most diseases are related to insulin. This is the major hormone that is creating obesity. When you ingest carbohydrates, insulin spikes. It opens up the cell so that the cell can receive the glucose. If the cell no longer needs the glucose, because of insulin, it stores it as fat. So insulin is the fat storage hormone. And eating the majority of your carbohydrates, as is recommended in the Western diet, you're creating an environment within your body that is extremely high in insulin, and this is detrimental to your health, as opposed to the ketogenic diet that is using a normal amount of protein and a very high amount of fats. The high amount of fats, basically, which I said was relatively neutral to insulin. Therefore, when you ingest a ketogenic diet that's super high in fat and super low in carbohydrates, you're not getting a lot of insulin spikes. And it's great as a preventative measure for insulin resistance, diabetes, and obesity. Insulin resistance, which we're learning is a reason that leads to diabetes, but not only diabetes, to obesity, heart disease, and also Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is known now as type 3 diabetes. It's a severe insulin resistance within the brain, which minimizes the brain's ability to use glucose efficiently. So the brain becomes starved and depleted. Even though there's a lot of sugar available there, the cells are not opening up and receiving the sugar because the insulin is always super high in your body. And the cells stop reacting to insulin. They stop opening up because they're bombarded with insulin all the time. So they develop a big resistance. This resistance can be reversed. Your cells can become resensitized to insulin by giving them a break, by creating an environment within your body that is very low in insulin. The ketogenic diet, like I mentioned, offers that. I believe that the ketogenic diet mimics more closely how our ancestors ate. We primarily, early on in our history, had to hunt. We ate a lot of the fat and the meat, and especially the organs of animals that we caught. We did have sources of carbohydrates that were primarily fruits and vegetables that often were seasonal. The fruits and vegetables that we have nowadays don't compare to the fruits and vegetables that we originally had in the wild. They've been genetically modified to be sweeter, contain more fructose, to be larger, to last longer. So eating one apple or orange today could be like eating 5 days worth of what our ancestors would have eaten during the day, picking berries and wild fruits that had much higher fiber in them. So human beings early on, a lot of the Native Americans and other cultures were eating primarily meat, and they were very restricted in their sugar. Therefore, they were probably often in ketosis. The other thing is that with the ketogenic diet, humans might have been in ketosis very often, but they were also fasting a lot. Sometimes they weren't able to catch the animals. Humans were adapted to hunt and run and do physical exertions on an empty stomach, tapping into their fat stores while they weren't getting any food. These long lapses in food intake created a primal response, which was an elevation in growth hormone when we're fasting, an activation of our sympathetic nervous system, adrenaline and dopamine and norepinephrine flooding through to maintain alertness and adrenaline, allowing us to be physically active while we weren't eating so that we could have the energy to go find the animals. Half of the answer to obesity is not only what we're eating, which is primarily the best way would to be a low insulin environment, hence the ketogenic diet that I think is optimal. Also, though, we didn't eat often. This 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and supper. Now they're encouraging snacks in between. Obviously, sometimes we often cheat in the evening. By doing this in the morning, you spike your insulin and can take up to 5 hours to come back to baseline. Remember that while insulin is present in the body, you can't tap into your fat stores. Insulin has to return to baseline, and then you can tap in to fat stores if there's no glucose available. So what would happen is you have an activation of the adrenaline system. Your body's like, hey, I do not have food. That's a fight or flight response that increases your basal metabolic rate. It maintains your metabolism. And the growth hormone is secreted. You can only have insulin, no growth hormone, or you can have growth hormone present with no insulin. You won't get both of them at the same time. So the growth hormone is there to preserve your muscle, so that our ancestors, every time they went through these famines or long periods without eating, they didn't lose all their muscle. It would be very stupid that our body would eat up all of our muscles when we still have fat storage. That just does not happen, especially when we're fasting. So it's pretty much a lie that if we fast, we're going to eat our muscles. The muscles will get eaten when we have no more fat storage, and then we're malnourished. And this did happen with our ancestors back in the day, but intermittent fasting, or a little bit longer fast, is a controlled method where we're deciding how long we're abstaining from food, and we're taking into account that we do have adipose tissue, we do have fat storage. So together with a ketogenic diet that offers low carbohydrates, high fat, it creates a low insulin environment. Adding the fasting intermittently, 16 hours of not eating, 8 hours of getting your meals, which are ketogenic, within that window of 8 hours, offers the best imitation of how humans early on were eating. The other thing that you have to take into account, one of the biggest things that has occurred in the last 100 years, is that in the 1950s, studies were done that were completely flawed about saturated fat and cholesterol. I can go into detail in other videos, but basically the studies were flawed. The idea that cholesterol is not good for you was done on rabbits who are vegetarian. Cholesterol comes from animal products. So when you're eating animals, whether it's eggs, meat, anything coming from animals has cholesterol. Plants don't really have cholesterol. So rabbits who are used to eating or are designed to eat only a vegetarian diet were infused with these animal products, and they died. And then they said, look what happens to rabbits when we ingest cholesterol. But we're not rabbits, all right? We're made to eat meat, and I don't think that we're made to eat as much meat as we currently eat. I think we eat just too much of everything and too often. But that doesn't mean that we're not designed to have a certain amount of meat and animal products. And yes, unfortunately, our whole food supply is tainted, from vegetables to fruits, from our water supply, from our meat and dairy supply. It's just unfortunate that our food is industrialized on a mass scale, and hormones are added. But that doesn't mean that back in the day, the ideal diet was not very close to a ketogenic diet. So when you take the fat and you elevate it like we do in a ketogenic diet, the first thing is that it's very satiating. It keeps you full for a long time. Sugar, it's a scientific fact, plays and totally dysregulates our leptin and ghrelin, as well as other hormones. It totally puts us out of whack. We're hungry when literally we're not hungry on a cellular level, meaning we cannot trust our hunger when we're ingesting carbohydrates. They act just like a drug. They make you hungry when your body really isn't hungry. They cause hormonal imbalances, spikes in insulin, drops in sugar. So a high carbohydrate diet is very much like a drug addiction, especially if you're adding sugar and the more refined sugars. When you start a ketogenic diet that's well balanced, let's not forget a ketogenic diet isn't an Atkins diet. It's not a high protein diet with a total restriction on food, on fruits and vegetables. Ketogenic diet has no real limitation on vegetables. They just avoid the starchy ones that are high in sugar. But we're not restricting the vegetables. And within the vegetables, you get all of the protein and nutrients that are required that you actually get in the fruits. And we're not limiting either the fruits completely. We're just really we're lowering it a lot, the amount of fruits, sometimes not even every day. But as long as you're eating a lot of vegetables, then you're covered with your minerals and the other benefits that you get from the fruits. You eat protein, and you eat the fat within the protein, and you also eat butter. So take away the margarine, add butter. Take away the Crisco, and go back to the lard that we were eating. The most detrimental thing that has happened is not only that we've taken out the good fats that we've been eating for, since antiquity and before, since early man, the fat within animal products, the fat within dairy, the cream, the butter that's produced with the cream, the oils that are easily extracted through cold pressing with no real fabrication to get the oil out, like olive oil, avocado oil, and the tropical oil like coconut oil. These three are safe and super healthy oils. But what we've done during the recommendation is we've taken out all of these good fats. We've said that they're dangerous, that they're causing heart disease, which is a total lie. And the research proves that this is totally inaccurate. It was false the whole time. And now they've suggested that we add vegetable oils. When I'm talking about vegetable oils, I'm talking about canola, which is actually rapeseed. There's no canola plant. We're talking about sunflower seed. We're talking about soybean, which has many other issues besides the way it's extracted. Vegetable oils have been encouraged to be taken. They've been said that they're heart healthy. They're seeds. To extract these oils, you need a large amount of seeds. It's heated. There's solvents that are added. This totally destroys the molecules. They make them highly inflammatory and highly unstable. They cause oxygen radicals, which mutate our cells. And because we need fat to be ingested through diet, that means that because we're restricting the traditional fats that I mentioned before, that I encourage that we eat, now our body is using these vegetable oils, these polyunsaturated, that are super inflammatory, that are high in omega-6, which is a pro-inflammatory fatty acid. And we're basically circulating all of our cells, which all have a lipid membrane. We're using the fats that we're giving to our body, and that's usually fabricated, highly unstable, highly inflammatory vegetable oils. Our brain is 60% fat and 20% cholesterol, and 20% of that 60% fat is omega-3. But we're severely depleted of omega-3, and a diet that should be 1-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 is about 20 to sometimes 50 to 1 if we're eating junk food. So 50 times more omega-6 than omega-3. So even if we're taking in a bit of salmon here, maybe a omega-3 supplement, it's just such an overwhelming amount of the vegetable oils that we're consuming that there's no benefit. We're all walking around with pro-inflammatory fats within our body. All diseases are a form of inflammation. Even heart disease, they're learning that it's an actual inflammatory process of the walls of our coronary arteries that are actually causing heart attacks, not clogging up with cholesterol. Cholesterol is actually there in the heart's vessel to heal it. Cholesterol is used everywhere in our body when there's a healing process that's necessary. But because the walls are so inflamed, there's so many tears and lesions and inflammation occurring that eventually the scabs that's over the inside of this wall trying to heal it can rupture. And when we look at autopsies, we see that there's cholesterol there that's blocked the passage. But it's like saying that every time you go to see a fire, a building on fire, you see firemen and ambulances, and you say, every time there's a fire, I see these two guys, the fireman and the ambulance, so they must be causing the fire. No, cholesterol is there, it's trying to help, but the inflammation is just so bad that you know, cholesterol ends up being there at the scene of a heart attack. That's pretty much the rationale for a ketogenic diet, the reason why it's good to eat a low carbohydrate diet. We don't need as much as we're being given. We probably could get away with well under 100 grams, and the recommendations are more 250 to 300 grams, which is insane. We don't need that much. It's causing sugar toxicity, it's causing insulin toxicity, it's causing resistance throughout our body, and it's causing inflammation. So if you're doing a ketogenic diet, just remember to look at all of your labels, make sure that there's no vegetable oil. All you want to see, all you want to be ingesting as oils is olive oil, avocado, and coconut oil. You don't want to be ingesting the sunflower seed, the soya bean, the rapeseed, the canola, the vegetable, which is a blend of canola and I think soybean or sunflower. None of these oils are really vegetables. They're seed oils, and they're loaded with toxic broken in molecules that damage the rest of your body, that go and attack the cells. The omega-6 is insanely high. It's totally out of balance. So if you just remove the vegetable oils and lower the sugar and up the good fats, the traditional animal fats, cream, butter, lay off of the margarine, you're going to be well on your way to a healthy body. All right, thanks, guys.